Hello, everybody. Welcome to Church History, our first lesson. We're going to be talking about the important cultural distinctions between East and West, and do we really mean when we talk about Western civilization. So let's jump right into it. This should be a little bit of a review for you guys. I have kind of the big time periods. What are we talking about when I'm talking about Western civilization? So these are just time periods I have here. These are completely just my opinions. If you ask any different historian, they're going to give you different dates and different time periods of what was really important when it comes to Western history and Western civilization. So let's just go through these really quick. I have question mark to 2500 BC. I would consider this prehistory. This is the time where we don't have writing developed yet, and we don't quite know exactly what was going on back then because we don't really have the records that we would need. Then we have 2500 BC to 800 BC. We'd consider that the ancient world. That's where we do have writing thanks to the Mesopotamians, but we still don't exactly know everything that happened during this time. A lot of it is still kind of fuzzy and vague. However, things get a lot more understandable when we get to classic antiquity, which is between 800 BC and 475 AD. This would be ancient Greece and the Roman Republic, and then the Roman Empire. So these are kind of where we get the classics that we sometimes talk about, especially in Western, the Western canon. Things like Homer and Cicero and the Latin language and all these things that we kind of use as kind of our baseline for what is a classic Western idea comes from this time period. Then we have 475 AD to 700. I would consider this the Dark Ages. This is what we've somewhat been talking about in this class so far. Kind of everything after the fall of the Roman Empire in the next 200 years. Then we have 700 through 1400. We'd call those the Middle Ages or the Medieval Age. This is where you have kind of the dominance of kings, and we kind of have these kingdoms that become kind of the prototypes of modern day countries. And then we have from 1400 to 1600, we have the Renaissance, the rebirth of a lot of that classic antique culture, and the Reformation, which we're going to go a lot in detail about when it comes to how the church ends up changing. This is also when you have the invention of the printing press, a real explosion in learning and understanding of the world. Then from 1600 to 1815, this is where you could probably have the most disagreement about my time period here. I just put down the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, two very important things that were happening in the West at the time, using science to try to understand our problems, and that included trying to understand human beings as well. From 1815 to 1914, I would call that the age of Western hegemony, or this was really the height of colonialism, and when Western ideas really spread around the world, including things like Christianity, sometimes at the end of a gun. And then we have kind of the collapse of that with World War I, and this is kind of leads into the modern era, which includes World War I, World War II, and then finally the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. I'd consider that the modern era. There's probably going to be a much better term for it 200 years in the future, but we're still waiting for that. And then from 1989 to now, I would call that the information age. Really, this is where computers and personal computers become a key part of life. You couldn't see me right now if it wasn't for the personal computer, and that's really kind of where we're at now. So who knows what the future holds. So what is Western civilization in the first place? What am I talking about when I say that? It's a set of ideals formed by a Greek and Roman tradition. It combines Greek and Roman ideals of individualism with Christian ideals of universal human rights. So not only just the Greek and Roman idea of trying to do the best for yourself and that the individual is important, but you add in the Christian idea that everyone has value and that everyone is made in the image of God and that everyone is important too. If you go back to ancient Greece and Rome, it would be, try to claw your way to the top and get the most, honor for your family and do it in any way possible. And Christianity tempered that quite a bit. This is usually followed in the West, places like Europe and the Americas, as opposed to the East, places like Eastern Asia. So we have kind of the difference here between East and West. Let's talk about the big differences between them. Western civilization is focused more on the individual. These are just broad strokes. You can go on and on if you want about a lot of the differences between Eastern and Western culture, and even if the idea of East versus West is even fair in the first place. But for the purposes of this class and for this review, I'm going to act as if they are. Western civilization is focused more on the individual, more focused on free will and the belief in human progress, that history has a beginning, a middle, and an end. That things are constantly improving in terms of technology, and that new ideas are coming in, and that we're headed towards a final end destination. That is a very Western idea. As opposed to Eastern civilizations, they're focused more on community and groups in general. This is all generalized, remember. They're more focused on fate / determinism, that there's a destiny for you and that you have to work into your destiny, and that's what's going to happen. There's also a belief in a cyclical view of history. This is the idea that history works in cycles as opposed to having a beginning, middle, and end, that you're in a different cycle of history. Common ideas about that include the mandate of heaven when we were learning about China and their whole imperial system, and then also ideas about reincarnation in Buddhism and Hinduism. These are kind of the borders of what we would consider the East today. We have the Middle East. There you go. Starting right here. Of course, we have places like India and Pakistan. We've got places, of course, like China, Mongolia, Japan, Southeast Asia, down here with Indonesia, and all these other places. These would be considered the East. But we're going to be talking about this area in yellow right here, which is at this time period that we're going to be talking about the Byzantine Empire in around the year 900. This is what it looks like right here. And this is always has been considered kind of the border between East and West. So the Byzantine Empire, what was it? The Byzantine Empire was kind of the continuation of the Roman Empire after it fell. If you remember, Constantine established his new capital in this city called Constantinople, which would be right here. It is now known as Istanbul. They considered themselves Romans. There really wasn't a name for them. They didn't say, we're the Byzantine Empire when they were around. They said, we're Romans. The Byzantine Empire was only a name created later to distinguish between the ancient Romans and the ones who were in the East after the fall of the Western Empire. They spoke Greek, though. They did not speak Latin. They followed ancient Roman laws. The Bishop of Constantinople was also called the Patriarch of the empire. So he was really the religious authority. Much like the Bishop of Rome is the Pope, the Bishop of Constantinople was the Patriarch. And so there's going to be a split between the Eastern Church and the Western Church later. We'll get there. And they began to put more of an emphasis on Mary, the Mother of Christ, and on religious art called icons. This will become a very, very big deal later. Be prepared for me to say that a lot. We'll get there. On page 128 of your books here, talks all about Emperor Justinian and Theodora, both famous rulers of the Byzantine Empire. You're going to learn all about them and what they ended up doing to strengthen the empire. They distinguished it from the old Roman Empire quite a bit, and they even built the Grand Hagia Sophia Cathedral, which is centered right here, kind of considered both an example of Eastern architecture and Western architecture melded together. Speaking of which, this is Istanbul today, the city where Constantinople used to be. This is called the Bosphorus Strait right here. This is considered the borderline between, your Eastern world and your Western world. And Constantinople stood right on it. So it's going to be important to learn about. What is an icon? Well, remember, icons are religious art, and these icons are going to become more and more of a problem later because there's going to be the accusation that people are worshiping the icons more than what they symbolize. So when I start talking about icons next time, when we talk about the iconoclast controversy, this is what I'm going to be talking about with icons. And here's an example of more icons. They're usually square-shaped pieces of art that usually go into these grand cathedrals, like the Hagia Sophia there. So that's all we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be giving you guys an assignment to read more about the Byzantine Empire and why it's important to our story. And then eventually we'll learn more about what's going on in the Western Roman Empire. The remains of it, I should say. We're going to be talking about kings like Clovis and Charlemagne, and eventually what they end up establishing. That will be the end of our unit. But for now, I will be giving you guys the assignment on Teams, and I'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone.